It is said that we are all connected to each other, to the earth, to the sky, to all living things, and to all matter, light and dark, in the universe. And I chewed on this as I blew out walking up and down 2nd Avenue, not driven by purpose, intention, or destination, not owned by need, not craving, not command, and all the while content to have the sunshine in my eyes. And because I'm connected to the universe, I know that in my eyes there were also moonbeams and echoes and stardust, glittering down like ash, so fine, no taste or smell, unfelt, invisible, but everywhere. And me, in my pistachio pants. The sidewalks of New York City were laced in street signs and crosswalks, crawling with humans connected by wires to cell phones, talking out loud about all the successes and failures and whose fault it all was, inappropriately flashing their audible privates. Nobody stays at home beside the phone anymore waiting for somebody to call. They don't have to. These people on sidewalks connected and crawling, talking and texting, and all I could think of was the sad fact that nobody's home. I smiled at 2 young lovers leaning into one another inside of an old out-of-commission payphone booth, laughing and talking, and I thought it was sweet until I discovered that they were looking at something on the screen of an iPad. And I muttered to myself, "Get out. Both of you, get out and go home." Now, I'm a long-time supporter of the mom and pop shop where they actually know your first name, they stock what you like and what you need, and they can actually answer your questions, and they even, by God, do it in English. And they appreciate your business, they smile, and they say thank you. So I was excited when I came upon this tiny little hole-in-the-wall hardware, whose humble storefront held open its single door and greeted me with every single useful tool and knick-knack I could imagine, jammed and dusty onto shelves and hooked into rows on pegboards that were lining the walls of each of the 2 aisles, tucked inside of a space half the size of a 1-bedroom apartment. Now, except for the old man sitting low behind the glass counter, I was the only person in the store. I nodded to the old man, who sat hunched over and tooling with something in his lap. And as I rounded the end of the first aisle and headed up the second, he set down his toolings and he said to me with an accent that I couldn't place, nor imitate. He says, "You change 1 cylinder. You bring it here and I do the work for you." Now, at the time, this made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. And as is my habit, instead of actually asking for clarification, my mind went off kilter, and in the midst of my confusion, I simply responded by saying, "No, I'm just looking, thanks." I found a 15-ounce solid brass plumb bob, coated with dust and stickered with a price tag that looked as if it had been stamped out in another century, showing a price of a whopping $8. So I pulled down the plumb bob, carried it up to the counter, and said, "This ought to do me." The old man folded his arms and looked down at my treasure, and with his lower lip puckered, he looked at me all squint-eyed, pointed his finger, and again he says, "You bring me 1 cylinder. I do the work for you." So I'm thinking, enough about the goddamn cylinder. I ask him, "What do you mean?" And then he wants to know how many locks I have on my door. And he says, "You never know who got a copy. All you got to do is change 1 cylinder. No problem. You're safe. You bring it. I fix you up. Now, I still couldn't place his accent. It was somewhat Hispanic, somewhat Italian/mobster, but certainly nothing like I'd ever heard on the West Coast. But I liked this guy. So I offered my hand and told him my name, and he returned my handshake with a good old-fashioned firm grip and said his name was Eddie. Eddie told me he came here from Cuba back in 1956. Wow. And then, as if we were best friends, he goes on to talk about his recent prostate cancer surgery, said it wasn't serious, it's all gone. Then he steps up closer and he says, man to man, I had a little pump put in my penis. Works beautiful, my friend. Very effective, Eddie says. Huh, cool, was all I could say. Then I asked, so what, does it require a battery or do you have to pump it up by hand? And he smiled and he said, 2 pinch, up it go. 1 pinch, down it come. Very effective, my friend, if you know what I mean. I love that guy. I paid for the plumb bob, shook hands with my new friend who said as I left, you bring it, I do the work for you. And I smiled and waved and was on my way back home. Stepping out of Eddie's hardware, I fell back into the stride along the flow of humans and cell phones, produce stands and garbage stacked up on the sidewalk, and a traffic cop dancing to his own silent song. Now, I sometimes chat these guys up when I'm waiting for the signal, and I find them to be pretty friendly, but lacking in charm. Sometimes I like to follow the parking cops as they scour the side streets and write in black books on pages they tear out and fix onto windshields. Today, I passed by a woman who was all pissed off and cussing. Son of a bitch, she yelled down the street where I saw an officer walking. And she says, you should be writing tickets for the goddamn no honking ordinance. Read the sign. Do your job, asshole. I couldn't agree more. I passed back by the phone booth, now dismissed of young lovers, but across from the front stoop of Miss Yushi, the psychic. She was sitting at a small table outside of her doorway. She watched and waved me over where she shared with me secrets bestowed her by the wisdom of India. She put a hand on my forehead and whispered words I couldn't decipher. She said that I had been a king in more than one past life, but that this life hadn't gone so well. No shit, I thought, and she put a hand over my heart. No words whispered, and she looked me straight in the eye and promised that all of the pieces would go back together. She asked me inside, but I told her I had no money. She smiled and said it was okay for now, dear king, but that I should come back when I do, before it's too late. The sign on her door read, ESP tested, 86% accurate. I lit a cigarette and smiled on the grace of 14 as I walked back to my apartment with plumb bob in hand. I came to New York to have days like this, and as the plumb bob swings from the end of a wire, tracing out lines in a plate full of sand, my head is hanging out the window of a 12th floor apartment, sifting through thoughts of how we're all connected. I am thinking of ashes. I'm thinking of stardust. I'm thinking of Eddie and the secrets that Miss Yushi will draw from my palm when I have the money. I'm different now. I'm different here. It got hot in Manhattan today. And me, all the while, in pistachio pants.